everybody. It's great to see you all here this morning. I am very excited to be able to have the opportunity to come and try to minister to you all with God's Word today. Mary Hart, I was just talking to her, and she brought up the great point that since we all have an extra hour of sleep, I don't have to worry about people, being tired or fatigued, so I can just go as long as we have to. So, depending on what happens, you might want to thank or not thank her, so we're good with that. Today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be covering the story of Joseph. And I know that that's a story that, you hear ever since you were a little kid. It's something that we're all pretty familiar with. But as I was going through my own personal Bible reading, there were just a lot of truths that were coming out in that story that I'm really excited to get to share with you today. So let's go ahead and start our service with a word of prayer, and then we'll get into the story of Joseph. God, we thank you so much for giving us the ability to come here together and worship you. We thank you for being able to lift up your name in song, Lord, to be able to worship you in that way. We thank you and praise you for the ability to open up your word and to read it and see what it has for us, to not worry about outside forces trying to dictate how it's presented or anything like that. We've been so blessed in this country. But God, I pray that you help us to take advantage of these opportunities. I pray that you help us to be studious with this word, God, that we open our hearts, that we try to search diligently for what it is that you have for us today, that you apply it to our lives. God, I pray so much that you give me the words to speak, Lord, the wisdom in what I say and how I say it. I pray that you help me to communicate this truth clearly to the people at church here today, Lord, that your name is honored, that your name is glorified, that we're all able to walk away and know just a little bit better who you are and what you have for our lives. I pray all this in your name. Amen. So before we start out with the story of Joseph, I think it's important that we get into a little bit about the background of the family. Because if you are familiar with Joseph at all, you understand just how crazy the family dynamic plays a role in the whole situation. So we all know Abraham, okay? The father of the nation of Israel, right? Now, God made a covenant with Abraham, and he told them that out of Abraham, he was going to make a great nation, that his descendants were going to be numbered like the stars of the heavens or the sands of the seashore. And Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob. Now, Jacob, when he came of the age to marry, due to other family circumstances, he tricked his brother out of his birthright, Esau, and he fled from that hometown, and he went to live with his cousin Laban, farther away. Laban had two daughters. One of them was Leah, and the other daughter, she was the oldest, and the other daughter was Rachel. Jacob loved Rachel. So when he went to Laban and asked for him to give him permission to marry his daughter Rachel, the youngest daughter, Laban said, "That's fine, but you need to work for me for 7 years." That's a long time, 7 years of your life. Jacob was willing to do that. He loved Rachel. He wanted to marry her, so he went ahead and he dedicated 7 years of his life. The wedding night came, and that you would use a veil to cover the face so that you couldn't see. It was just traditional. That was ceremony. So her face was covered. They get done with the wedding ceremony. That night, Jacob realizes, you gave me the wrong sister, and I married Leah, not Rachel. And he is livid. He goes to Laban and asks him, "Why you tricked me?" And he says, "It's not my fault. It's tradition for us to give the oldest daughter first. That's just custom. You can't be mad at me about that. Look, if you want the youngest daughter, go ahead, work for me another 7 years, and then we'll be fine." Yeah, that's a pretty dumb bargain, right? It just seems ridiculous. He's just yanking his chain all over the place. We see corruption, all of this crazy family tension happening. And Jacob agrees. So he works in another 7 years. So the end result of this deceit, this corruption, this wickedness, this constant manipulation, trying to get everything you can for yourself so that you can benefit yourself, this is where the huge problems end up happening with this family. Genesis 29:31. I'm just going to read that verse for you real quick, just to give you an idea of what's happening here. Okay, pages are sticking. All right, it says, "When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah was not just the wife that got thrown onto the end of the deal. She was hated. There was a negative emotion there. There was tension. There was strife. And when God saw that, he wanted to help her. So he opened up Leah's womb, and Rachel he left barren. Leah ended up having 10 sons. So now you got this, he hates me as a wife, or think about it from the son's perspective, he hates my mother. And now you've got Rachel, when she finally has Joseph, he loves Joseph's mother, and he loves Joseph, but he doesn't really care much for us. Now, if that wasn't enough to cause some division and some tension, Jacob's sons were pretty intense guys. They were rough. They were tough. They were violent. We've got an account in the book of Genesis, just a little bit later. I'll just name the first 4 sons. You've got Reuben, who was the oldest. You have Simeon and Levi, and then you have Judah. And this passage talks about those brothers in particular. Well, Jacob had a daughter named Dinah. She went out and wanted to go see some of the women of the land, it says. Well, a prince in the city that she was in took her, forced himself on her, and it says that the prince humiliated her. Well, once that was done, the king said, "My son loves your daughter. How about you just give him to marry it, so that we can marry your daughters, you can marry ours." Jacob, it said, he held his peace until his sons could return. The sons of Jacob, says they were extremely angry when they heard what had happened to their sister. And they went to go talk to the prince and the king. I'm not going to go into too many specifics because I don't really want to go an hour longer on you guys. What ended up happening is the sons of Jacob devised this plan, this scheme, to put the prince and the king and all the men of that city in this weakened state. And 3 days after they were in this weakened state, it says that Simeon and Levi, the sons of Jacob, went in with swords against the men of that city and killed all of the men. And then they took all of the donkeys, the possessions, the wealth, the women and the children, and pulled them in as their own possessions, as their spoils of war. And it was all because what happened to Dinah, the sister. Jacob is upset. He's like, "Look what you did. Now everyone's going to want to kill me because of the drastic measures that you guys took." I've been conflicted on this response. Does that mean that Jacob was a little bit too soft? Because I think of what would have happened to my children, and if my son was hurt, the extent that I would want to go to. And obviously I don't think it's right to just go in and kill a bunch of people. That's not okay. But would I actually just be upset with my sons when they took that? I'm conflicted. I'm going to leave it at that. Jacob said, "Why did you do this? Now all the land, I stink to them because now you guys did this terrible, wicked thing." Their response, "What? Would you rather our sister be treated like a prostitute?" And that was it. That's the way that Jacob's sons were. You didn't mess with Jacob's sons. You didn't hurt the family of Jacob because they were going to do what they needed to do to prove that you messed up. And they were going to make it hurt badly. So we see this dynamic here. Well, when we keep going, and it goes on all the way to chapter 37. Okay, that's where we start to talk more about Joseph. I'm going to pick up in chapter 37, verse 1. It says, "Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father." So right here, not only is Joseph the favorite, not only is his mother more favored than our mother, now he's going out and telling dad that we're doing bad things. Could he just get any more obnoxious? Could he just step on us any more possibly? It's like there, you see a lot more tension building up here. There's a lot of anger. The passage goes on. He sees that, all right, it says, a bad report of them to their father. "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors." Now, this coat signified a lot of things. One, it had implications that the birthright was going to go to Joseph. So older brothers, who are old enough to be men of war, to conduct themselves in a capable, independent fashion, see the 17-year-old boy getting this obvious, favorable treatment, and now all of the inheritance of their father looks like it's going to go to them. This causes even more problems. Another thing that I thought was interesting when I was studying this passage is that the coat, in some of the ancient Hebrew texts, it was also translated as a long coat. So the sleeves were longer and the robe was longer. The typical work fashion for men in that days was a short tunic with no sleeves. You're able to get dirty, you're able to get rough, you're not worried about doing anything that's going to damage your clothing. This long coat symbolized that he is above manual labor. He's more important than that. The older sons hadn't gotten that kind of treatment. And it's just even more obvious. It's just another driving nail that says, you guys are nothing. Joseph is everything. I love them more than you. And we see that division continue even more. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his other brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. This is obvious. Joseph is picking up on this too. Don't miss that. There's obvious tension here. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream, and told it to his brothers, and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So here we are. And, I've heard several different passages, like preachers talk about this, that maybe Joseph was driving things in a little bit more. Like, hey, by the way, I had a dream that all of you are going to serve me one day. So they kind of think that maybe Joseph was also contingent in this. Throughout the whole story of Joseph, I'm able to see a man who's willing to give hard news, whether or not people like it or not. And he understands the importance of his sovereignty. You might remember right off the bat, he says, "Do not all dreams belong to God?" So I'm willing to think that he was more saying this because he thought that this was a divine revelation. But still, it drove apart the children even more. It drove apart all the sons. God does not use perfect people to accomplish his plan. His perfect plan is accomplished in spite of our imperfection. I remember when me and Sierra were both going through these, when we were trying to read the Bible all together, and she comes to me and she says, "I just read this stuff about Jacob and his sons. What? What is going on here? All the drama, the fighting, everything else." Because what do you think? This is God's chosen people, right? These are the people that God said, "We would make you a mighty nation, that your descendants would be countless." But most importantly, this is the nation from whom the Messiah will come to pay for the sins of the world. And this is what we see. We can't forget the fact God is not using perfect people that have all their lives together, that have anything in a row. He uses us in spite of our imperfections, in spite of our fallibility. So in our personal lives, we can't rule that out if God's working in our own life simply because we don't think we're up to par, because God's going to use us in whatever way that he sees fit. This evil, this wickedness, this tension between the brothers leads up to Joseph eventually being sold by his brothers into slavery. Chapter 37, 5 through 11. Sorry, we just read that. We're picking up in verse 12. It says, "Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, 'Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them.'" Thanks, Dad. Last time I gave a bad report of my brothers, that went real well. Good thinking, That might be my interpretation of that. But what does Joseph say? He says, "Here I am." He's willing to go. He's submissive to his father's will. Jacob says, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. That's about a 50-mile journey. It says, a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" He said, "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They weren't where they were supposed to be, probably not doing what they were supposed to be doing. So Joseph's brothers see him coming over the horizon. Are they happy to see him coming? No, probably not, because now it's going to get even worse with their father. They said they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They are so disgusted by his presence, they immediately choose to do the most wicked thing that they could possibly think. Now, as we go through this passage, we see that Reuben tries to convince them, don't kill him. We don't need to have his blood on our hands. Let's just beat him and throw him in the pit. Okay? That sounds like a better idea. So they go ahead, they beat him, they strip him of the cloak that his father gave him, and later on in the passage, when Joseph's brothers are coming back from Egypt, we get a little glimpse of how they still feel about that. They say, God is not showing us mercy right now because we did not show mercy to Joseph when he cried and begged us. The begging that Joseph was doing to his brothers in this moment, the cries that he was giving, haunted his brothers for 30 years. They did not forget it. This was a very bad situation. It was painful to see. Reuben goes, and I also just want to point out, this is just how callous the brothers are to good spiritual things, to morality, okay? They beat him, they throw him in the pit, they strip him of the cloak that he was given. Verse 25, it says, then they sat down to eat. That's it. It's like they're at a normal work day. Everything's fine. They just sit down to eat. It's time to eat lunch. Let's just leave them in the pit right there, okay? It's like this is how responsive they are to what would be right and good and godly. When this happens, when they're sitting there eating, we see Judah notices a trading caravan coming through. And Judah, the fourth oldest son, says to his brothers, it's not going to do us any good if we kill Joseph. Who's that going to profit? And why do we need our brother's blood on our hands? Let's just sell him instead. Let's just sell him into slavery. So Joseph is sold as a human slave. The price of 20 shekels of silver, which was the price that they sold him for, was the average price of a slave. They stripped Joseph of the coat that signified his status with his father. They stripped him of the status of being their brother. They stripped him of all extra worth by selling him as an average common slave. They didn't even try to make a few bucks off of it. They said, you're not even worth that. We're just going to get you out. What's the going rate for a human slave? This was the son of a prince. This was a son of Jacob. Obviously, he was a good worker. Obviously, he was qualified. When we see him do amazing works later on in his life, obviously he had skills. Then, no, you're just average. You're nothing to us. They hurt him in every possible way that they could. Jacob is told that a wild animal has devoured Joseph. Jacob, no doubt, felt responsibility over what happened to his son. Because I'm sure that Jacob in that moment was looking over his whole life, thinking about the decisions that he made with his sons, the 10 oldest sons, and then with Joseph. He sent Joseph on that errand. He sent Joseph to go check in on his brothers again. He was the one that made it so obvious that he was the favorite. I mean, I can't imagine. I think of, how much I love Aiden. I used to think that I would be protective of a family, but once you have a son, it just blows your mind just how much more you are willing to do for them under any circumstance. Jacob, the son that he loved more than anything, is dead, and you can't help but think that he feels the responsibility of this. The terrible chain of events we see here is a manifestation of many years of wicked acts. We cannot forget the importance of taking deliberate action to do the right thing when it comes to the responsibilities that God has entrusted us with. However, even though there is obvious failure on the part of God's chosen people, God will still use them to accomplish his perfect will. I'm not going to stand here and say that if we don't do the right thing, everything's going to go bad. Because we still see God's sovereignty playing a picture in all of it. We still see God using the situation for his honor and our benefit, for his glory, and for our good and salvation. Jesus Christ still comes from the nation of Israel. That still happens. But we really can't miss the point that if we don't take advantage of the opportunities to correct, to admonish, to love those that are around us and point them in the direction to Christ, we will see heartbreak. We will see pain. There will be bad things that come from that. Right now, you might be thinking that there is a topic or an issue that needs to be discussed in the family. There might be something that needs to be corrected. And it might be easier to not have the conversation now. But we can't be so narrow-minded. We can't just look at the tiny little instance of, man, it would be really tough to have this conversation, and not think of the huge picture. Because what do we see with Jacob's family? We see brothers being torn apart against each other to the point that they're willing to kill each other. We see brothers that hate their father. The tension there. There's no respect there. But most importantly, we see a family that's not willing to serve God. And that's what I would like to encourage you guys with more than anything. Think about your loved ones, the conversation that you're scared to have with them, the conversation that you're a little bit nervous about. What is that going to do with their relationship with God? How are you going to help them to grow closer to Him, to correct this issue in their life now? Even if they don't respond, it's not about whether or not they make the right decision or if we think they're going to receive it, but did we do what we could have with the time that we had? Did we really take advantage of that? We see Joseph, he's sold into slavery, and he's eventually taken to Potiphar, who is the captain of the guard. Now, just a little bit of background there. Egypt at this point is the world's strongest force. They're strong economically. They're making huge developments architecturally with their technology, and their military is unparalleled. Now, you take the captain of the guard. That's one pretty mean dude, I'm sure. He's one tough guy. Potiphar was not going to be someone you wanted to mess with. We end up picking up here. Sorry, I'm going all over the place. I got to find my notes again. All right, so now we're over in chapter 39, verses 1 through 6. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of the Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Even though Joseph was in this terrible situation, the Lord is clearly with him. Potiphar saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. In a terrible situation, Joseph turns his gaze not to the problems that were facing him, but instead to the God that he trusted. In an amazing act of trust and humility, Joseph submits himself to the will of God, even though it has apparently only brought pain. When we are in a difficult situation, do we focus on the pain around us, or do we look to God, the author and the finisher of our faith? It's really easy sometimes to correlate bad things that happen in our life with the bad things that we have done. Well, of course I don't deserve God's blessing, I've screwed up here. I've messed up. I've let this sin prevail in my life. But Joseph is not doing that. Joseph is trying to follow after God. Joseph is serving God. He's being submissive to the will of his father, even though his father's asking him to do jobs he probably didn't want to do. And that's when Joseph is punished. That's when he is pushed. That's when he is tried. But the response of Joseph, as we see, as it keeps on going, when he is watching Joseph, a slave, and don't forget that, it's not just a regular employee. Joseph is a slave. He is property. But when Potiphar sees him, it is so evident that the Lord is with him. When we go about our daily work lives, when we go into the workforce, when we talk to our families, are we living a life that people are going to be able to look at us and say, the Lord is with him. He's a Christian. He is different. The way he responds to issues in the workplace, that's unique. He has a testimony that you can see because of who his God is to him. If any of you have been in a workplace, and I'm sure every one of us have, or just any group of people, honestly, what do you hear when the boss does something that you don't like? Everybody is complaining. Everybody is sick of it. Everyone is tired. There's office politics. There's drama. There's rumors. There's gossiping. There's backbiting. There's trying to slack off as much as you can because, well, they pay me to do this job, not to do the other stuff that they try to throw on me, There's laziness. There are so many issues that happen in the workplace. the encouragement we can have here is that we live our lives in such a way that it is obvious that God is with us. God, our relationship with him, should have such a visible impact that other people can see what we're doing, even if, like in Joseph's case, where he was a slave in a foreign land. Another thing that this kind of points out is that even though that Joseph is in a foreign land, even though he has lost his freedom, he has lost his status, he's lost his birthright, his father thinks that he's dead, all these bad, terrible things have happened, Joseph knows that God is in control. I couldn't help but think of the passage where Jesus Christ is telling the disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns. Your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown in the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. For tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." Just an amazing encouragement to not focus on the terrible, awful things that are going on around us, but instead to look to God as our sovereign creator, the one who knows all things, the one who is in control of all things, who's all-powerful, and who ultimately has our best interests in mind. Are we really trusting him and living a life in light of that trust? Once Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph, he made him in charge of his whole house. Joseph had access to everything but Potiphar's wife. Potiphar had no concern for anything but the food he would eat. Do we perform our duties with the same vigor as Joseph? Now, once again, we get to a situation where Joseph is doing the right thing. His testimony is perfect. Everyone knows that the Lord is with him. Potiphar made a slave the second in command of his entire house. All he has to worry about is the food he's eating. Well, what happens? Joseph is tempted by Potiphar's wife. She wants to have an affair with him. Joseph says no. He does the right thing. And this is where we would think, great, that's awesome. God is going to deliver Joseph from this awful situation and bless him even more because he did the right thing and did not have this affair with Potiphar's wife, even though she was so diligent in trying to drag him down to her level of wickedness. That's not the case. Potiphar's wife accuses Joseph of rape. And it says when Potiphar heard it, we've got the verse right here, verse 18. It says, or 19, sorry. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. We're going to come back to that in just a second. But again, think of that. He's doing everything that he should, and he's still getting punished for it. He's still having these problems. I had this thought while I was studying this passage, and I just was thinking, if Joseph had a copy of Your Best Life Now, the prosperity gospel, he probably would have chucked it out the window at this point. I'm here serving God, I'm being diligent, I'm being faithful, and I can't get ahead. This is not working right. But no, everything, Joseph is still found favor with God. He shows him steadfast love. The Lord was with Joseph, showed him steadfast love, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Joseph is arguably in this situation because he did what God would have wanted. While it may have been easy to blame God for losing all the success and all the things that he had been experiencing, Joseph continued to trust God. Everything that Joseph had, that he was placed in charge of, even in the prison, the Lord made it succeed. We'll finish out that passage real quick. But the Lord was with Joseph, showed him steadfast love, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison, And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. I can't help but bring in this little thought that I read in one of the commentaries. If you were a slave in Egypt and it was rumored that you were trying to sleep with the wife of the captain of the guard, what would you imagine the punishment would be? Probably a terrible, gruesome death, right? Like, I mean, that's like, if anything, that would almost be like a power move on behalf of the captain of the guard. Hey, nobody messes with my wife. Look what happened to the last guy, you know? Like, but instead, he just puts Joseph in prison. One of the commentaries I was reading just brought it up as a point. We really don't have anything confirming or denying this, but maybe the anger that Potiphar had that was kindled was also directed at his wife, because he knew that Joseph wouldn't actually do that. And maybe that's why he was only put in prison. We can't say that for sure, but it is possible that the testimony of Joseph was able to help keep him in such a blameless state to where he was able to go into this prison and not be killed. We also see immediately, with the Lord being with Joseph, he's immediately put in charge of the prison. How many times do you hear about that? The prisoner is so good and so righteous and so capable that the jailkeeper puts him in charge. that just doesn't happen. That is not something that happens every day. It is very rare. As this happens, okay, sometime after this, in chapter 40, the cupbearer, the king of Egypt, and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in custody of the house of the captain of the guard and the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. Once the baker and the cupbearer were both thrown in jail, they both had troubling visions. The cupbearer dreamt that there were 3 clusters of grapes, and he was able to squeeze out the grapes and get wine for Pharaoh, and he was able to give it to him. The baker had a dream that he had 3 baskets of bread on his head, and the crows started to come down and eat from the baskets of the bread. Now, Joseph is there, and he's obviously taking care of these guys. Joseph tells them that all dreams belong to God. Right here, we still see Joseph's submission to the sovereignty of God. He's not saying, hey guys, I've had a thing about dreams ever since I was really young, so I can probably help you out. No, he says, all dreams belong to God. So let me see if I can help you. Let me see if I can interpret them for you. The cupbearer is informed that in 3 days he will be brought back to serve in the Pharaoh's court. The baker is informed that he will lose his life in 3 days. He's going to die by hanging. Again, Joseph is able and willing to say the good news that God has for him, and also the bad news, the hard news that isn't really that pleasant to share. Even though the obvious plan fails, okay, because what we end up seeing, the cupbearer, it all comes to pass. In 3 days, the cupbearer is brought back into position with Pharaoh. He gives him his food. He's like a wine taster. He tests it, makes sure that nothing has been poisoned. He's handling the food. He's right there in close connection with Pharaoh. They have a very good relationship. Joseph says, hey, can you tell Pharaoh about me and my situation when you go up and talk to him? And you would think, like, this is awesome. God is providing a way for Joseph to get out of prison. This is perfect. This is the door. This is what's happening. Joseph has been faithful. It's about to be rewarded. And what does it say later on? It says, and the cupbearer forgot Joseph. Like, what? How? That's not right. That's not fair. That's not okay. You just forgot about him? He just told him that he was going to get out. How do you just forget about somebody like that? But that was all part of God's plan. That was God's sovereign will. The baker is in 3 days. He does lose his life. And we see how God has control over all those circumstances. At this point, it's important to speak of the importance of enduring faithfulness. Patience and long-suffering are fruits of the Spirit. Do we live our lives in a way that would reflect a patience that is trusting the sovereignty of God and his plan? I have heard people talking about 2 big things for months now. COVID and the elections. We have Everyone has a response. Everybody has an opinion. But no matter how oppressive things might get, no matter how difficult we might see things become, are we actually living a life that's in light of the fact that, hey, it doesn't matter because God is in control and he's going to bring everything out to the best result. He's going to bring everything out for his glory and for our good because he loves us more than anything. Just imagine Tuesday comes, like, let's just say one party wins that we don't really want to win, okay? I'm trying to stay very vague here. Let's just say that happens. Are we actually going to be, like, it really doesn't matter. Whatever side you're on. If we look at that situation and we see the other side win, are we going to have the submission to God and his will and his sovereignty and his power and wisdom and love to say, God, you brought the right leader into the appointed place. You let this happen for a reason. Not you let this happen. You intended it to happen for a reason. This is part of your plan. This is what you wanted. And I trust you with that. Will we have that faithfulness to God, no matter how bad things get? And just think of this, okay? This is the awesome encouragement from Joseph right here. He has been kicked his whole life. He's been hit with every hard circumstance he can. Some of us have hard family situations. He had one. There was attempted murder. He was sold into slavery. He was unjustly accused of a terrible, awful sin, and he was thrown in prison. If anybody has the right to say, enough with it, I'm done, it would be Joseph. But instead we see enduring faithfulness on Joseph's part to the will of his God. The next part that we're going to look at is how Joseph actually ends up serving Pharaoh. In chapter 41, verse 8, we see Pharaoh, he's just had a dream that's really bothering him. It says, so in the morning, his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all his wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there were none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. This is when Pharaoh looks out and asks, verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today. Whoops, I forgot. I screwed up. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dream to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And this is when Pharaoh gets to tell the message, the dreams that he had. Joseph is able to interpret them, and he's able to say, we're going to get into that. But Joseph should not have come out of the pit 2 years ago when the cupbearer was brought back into Pharaoh's favor. It shouldn't have happened. It wasn't supposed to happen. And thankfully, it didn't happen. Because God knew that in 2 years, he was going to give Pharaoh several dreams that Joseph needed to interpret at that time. Not then, now. We see the sovereignty of God there. It was all in God's perfect timing. Now we read chapter 41, verses 14 through 36. I'm going to read that real quick. Now, I'm actually not going to read the first time. The dreams that Pharaoh had, he sees 7 cows along the Nile. They were healthy, fat cows. And 7 sick, deathly looking cows come up from the Nile River. And they eat the fat cows. And he sees 7 ears of grain that were healthy and strong. And then he ends up seeing 7 sick, weak ears come and shrivel up the fat ears. And here's the response. Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them there will rise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe.
And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. Joseph gives the credit of the dream interpretation to God. I hope you noticed that. It was nonstop. This is what God has shown to Pharaoh. This is what God has planned to do to Pharaoh. God will do this. God has said this. There's a constant emphasis on the sovereignty and the will of God. Joseph makes it very clear that God is warning Pharaoh of the trouble ahead, and God will bring everything to pass. In this phrase, we get a much better understanding of why Joseph did the things that he did. He personally believed that God was actually in control of everything around him. It is this truth that helped Joseph to remain faithful to God despite the tragedies that befell him at every stage of his life so far. Now let's see in chapter 41, verses 37. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards to the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set before you all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. And he made him ride in his second chariot. And they called out before him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephanath-Paneah, and he gave him in marriage to Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. After noticing that God is with Joseph, Pharaoh decides to make Joseph the second in command of all of Egypt. We also see Joseph storing up grain. He continues to do this job. Over in verse 49. It says, "And Joseph stored up grain in abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured." Just step back a second and look at that amazing shift. Just earlier in the day, Joseph was in a pit. He had to shave and he had to change clothes before he was even able to come into the presence of the Pharaoh. And now, all of a sudden, Pharaoh has said, "It is obvious that God is with you, and you are a man who is wise and discerning. So I'm going to make you second in command." The Egyptians had a special term for this position. It was the vizier of Egypt, the second person in command. The Pharaoh was not just a king in Egyptian culture, he was also a deity. But the vizier, he was the one who would control everything. He made all the decisions. We have this guy who just came out of a pit, and now he's in charge of everything. God is still with Joseph. Joseph continues to remember God's provision in his life. It's not that once he gets successful, once he ultimately has all that power, and he has all this control over the greatest kingdom in the whole world, it's not that he forgets God. Because we see in verse 50, before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for, he said, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." The name of the second he called Ephraim, "For God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." There's still a lot of pain there. There's still a lot of issues that he has. The issues that were happening in that family, they still plague him. And you see it with the first name of his son. God has made me forget all the hardship and all of my father's house. I can't help but think that's just sad, to have that kind of a remembrance of your parents, of your family. But we still see, even with that second name, "For God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Joseph still understands that everything that happened was for a purpose. God had a reason for it, and God has made me prosper, even despite all of that hardship. The next thing that we see is how Joseph saves Israel and is reunited with his family. I would love to go into more detail about the reunion of Joseph and his family. It is amazing, and it is just a beautiful story. There's so much emotion in it of how these brothers that were so against each other come back to terms. I mean, there's a part where Benjamin, once he comes back to Egypt with his brothers, It says Joseph sees him, and once he reveals himself, he just falls on Benjamin's neck and he just weeps. That's his baby brother that he hadn't seen in 30 years. These are the 10 brothers that kept him from him. It's an amazing story. We also see not just regret and sorrow on behalf of the 10 older brothers. We see a new understanding of the sovereignty of God. When Judah is talking to Joseph, trying to plead with him, please let my youngest brother go back to Egypt. He's not saying, it's just what's right, it's what's good, you know. He's talking about how God is punishing them for what they did wrong. And he understands the guilt. He understands why they messed up and why they deserve this, why they deserve the punishment that the vizier of Egypt is threatening to put on Benjamin, the youngest son. But we have not that much time, and I'm going to keep focusing on our main theme of how God is actually in complete control of the situation, how he's got sovereignty and he's watching out for Joseph. We see Jacob, and I'm just going to summarize the next few points here. Jacob sends his 10 sons to go buy grain from Egypt. And it's kind of funny how he says it. It's right there in chapter 42, verse 1. When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." What are you doing just looking at each other? This is a bad time. The famine is hit. There's grain. Go buy it so that we don't die. So the brothers get together and they go down. From the Hebron Valley to Egypt, it was about 250 miles away. So it was a pretty good distance to walk. I'm sure they rode camels or donkeys. They had a lot of those, you know. We hear about Jacob's wealth. Joseph recognizes his brothers and decides to test them before he reveals himself. Joseph tells him that he needs to see his younger brother Benjamin before he will believe that they are not spies, and they need to prove that you actually have the younger brother with you. If you want to have more grain, if you want to keep getting food from Egypt like this. So the next time, once they run out of grain, they bring Benjamin back the second time, and that is when Joseph reveals himself as their lost brother. So this is what I'd like to read for you, Joseph's response in chapter 45, verse 4. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, who you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry.'" Joseph explains that it was God that sent him to Egypt and not them. God is the one that saved their family from destruction. Jacob's entire family comes to Egypt from Hebron, and they settled in the best land in Egypt in a spot called Goshen. A fertile place that they were able to raise their crops, they were able to grow, that they were able to thrive as a people. Pharaoh gives them the task of taking care of his livestock, and all of Egypt readily welcomes them. Jacob lives in Egypt for 17 years before he passed away. Jacob was embalmed and per his request of Joseph was buried in his homeland and not Egypt. You see an amazing situation. I was listening to a message from John Piper that went for a very long time. He covered so much more. That guy's just an amazing speaker anyways. It was crazy. But when he's talking about this passage and about how time after time Joseph was brought down, saved, brought down, saved, brought down and saved, it's like God is bringing his plan on the brink of ruin, on the brink of disaster, so that he can put them back into place and prove that he is God, that he is the one in control, that he knew what was best the entire time. Let's go back to the beginning, the foundation. Let's not forget who this family was. This is the family that the Messiah is going to come from, 250 miles away from Egypt. And God knew that there would be a situation where there's going to be a famine that lasts for 7 years, and I'm going to make a country 250 miles away so prosperous that they can't even count the grain that they have because I've blessed them so abundantly, so that they can save Jacob's family from complete destruction, and the Messiah would one day be born from that line. and I will keep my promise to the children of Israel. It is such an amazing act of God. After Jacob dies, Joseph's brothers become afraid that Joseph will take vengeance. And I'd like to just share with you that just once again, Joseph really hammers in that fact that he understands that God is in control of everything. And it's chapter 50, verses 15 through 21. It says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. This last phrase, like one of the last phrases he makes, you meant evil against me. The brothers were acting against God's will. They were acting in their own selfish desires. They were acting out of their own best interest. They were acting out of revenge. Just so selfish. No regard for their brother, no regard for their father, no regard for anybody but themselves. And they were going to kill him. And then they decided to sell him, to do a terrible thing. Remember we talked about it. They took him, they threw him in the pit. They took his coat, they stripped him of the status of the family, of the son of Jacob. They stripped him of the status as their brother. And they stripped him of normal human status. They did everything they possibly could to drive in the fact, you are nothing, we do not like you, you deserve this. You deserve death or slavery. They did everything, it was very intentional. They meant it for evil. But God meant it for good. It was intentional. It was purposeful. It was not an accident. It was not a coincidence. It was not something where God was able to say, well, this family turned out to be a little bit more of a disaster than I thought they would, so what can we make out of this? No, it wasn't that at all. God meant it for good. He sent Joseph to Egypt. He sent Joseph to Egypt so that he could be in Potiphar's house. He sent Joseph to Egypt in Potiphar's house so that he could be falsely accused of rape and put in prison. So that then he could become the vizier of Egypt and save, arguably hundreds of nations in that area. You're talking about a 250-mile radius. All the civilizations that would be around in that area. God was able to save so many of them through Joseph and the hard work that he was able to do. When are we tempted to take matters into our own hands? When do we feel things slipping away? I don't know how many of you remember this, but when Savinsky was talking about Titus 3, how we cast all our cares upon him. It was like, if I remember correctly, the word was ricto. You're casting, and it's an indefinite term. It's like you're continuously casting all your cares upon him. He used a fishing analogy, remember? You just take that reel and you just cast it, and it just keeps going and going. All your cares, all your troubles are just going on to God. There's nothing that you're holding on to until you get impatient. And he used the word picture with his sons. They get impatient as they're fishing, and what do? They cast it out, and they just reel it right back. We got to bring it back. This is our problem. We got to deal with it. Are we casting all of our cares upon God because we understand that he cares for us? Because he's really going to take care of us. He really does have our best interests in mind. When do we become impatient with the lack of progress to our own goals? We have to think about that. I do this personally so many times. I think, I'm not where I want to be. What do I need to do to get to the next step? What do I need to do to have the life for Aiden that I want? To have the life for Sierra that I want? What about the things that I want? How do I get to that position? One, what do I want? How do I get that? What do I get what I think is best for Aiden? It's all about me. It's all about what I think is the best thing to do at that given moment. None of it is about what is God's will for Aiden or Sierra. So how many times do we do that? How many times do we take our goals and our wants and our desires and we supersede them above everything else that God has for us, or above his will for us, and we just drive ourselves to that, and then we become impatient, we become stressed, we become tumultuous with all the pressure that we put on ourselves. Do we have a personal conviction of the sovereignty of God? Throughout the whole story, every time that Joseph was put into a situation where he was asked about dreams or interpretations, when he was asked, why aren't you going to kill your brothers and bring back and avenge yourself? Why is it that you aren't going to be mad at God, for being in prison? Why is it that's questions that we might ask. No one actually directly asked him those questions. But what do we see in his response to Pharaoh? God is in control. God has given you this dream. God is going to bring this thing about to pass. What is it that we see when he talks to his brothers, when they're scared that they're going to kill him? God meant this for good. God brought me here so that many people would be saved. God put me in Egypt. It wasn't you, it was him. So I just really hope and I pray that as we go through the next few weeks, because it's going to get really crazy, I think, that we remember God is the author and the finisher of our faith. God is the one who is sovereign. He is in control. He has a plan for everything. No matter how things go down with COVID, no matter what lockdowns come upon us, no matter how many of us might get sick from it, no matter what comes out of this election, no matter if the person that we think should have it or the person we don't think should have it gets into office, no matter what, are we going to be able to rest comfortable and secure in the fact that God has meant all of this for our good, for what's best, for his glory? And are we going to be able to live our lives with the vigor and the determination and the passion that Joseph had in every area of life that is reflective of the fact that the Lord is with us? We're going to bow our heads real quick for a moment of prayer. And then it's not a typical invitation song, but we're going to sing How Great Thou Art, and that's what we're going to close out with today. But yeah, let's go ahead and we'll bow with a word of prayer, and we'll just thank God for his sovereignty. God, we thank you so much, Lord, for the truths that you've given us in your word today. You've been able to show us this story of a man, Joseph, just a regular man, who at every moment you gave him a new obstacle, a new trial. But every time he knew that you were with him, God, and he submitted himself to your will. And he did the best he could with everything he had. And he lived for you. He served you because he knew that you were a God worth serving. I pray, Lord, that you help us to take that passion, that enduring faithfulness, that personal conviction that you are in control. And I pray, God, that you'll apply it to our lives. Help us to be convicted of areas that we're not letting go, that we're not giving you sovereignty, God. And I pray that you help us to just be willing to relinquish everything. Help us to be a testimony to everyone around us. I pray, God, so much that you are the one that people see when they see this church. As all of us go to our separate jobs, to our families, that people are able to look at us and say, the Lord is with them. Just like people were able to say that about Joseph. I pray that we glorify you with the rest of the day, Lord. I pray this in your name. Amen. All right, we're going to stay.